All right. We're lighting up the nation, essentially. And that's the work of the Kenya Power and Lighting Company. And the managing director and CEO of KPLC is with us again in the hot seat today. Dr. Engineer Joseph Siror is here as our guest. Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very fine, thank you.
Karibu sana.
Asante sana.
Things are lighting up.
Yes.
They are?
The country is lit.
The country is lit.
Yes.
You know, we're in an era where lit, we're in an era where what lit means today is not what lit would mean before. But actually, if we look at both meanings, it's actually probably in line, isn't it? So the country is lit, according to the KPLC managing director and MD. And I think we should go with that. Pass the word to Asha. The country is lit. Karibu sana.
Asante.
Thank you for being here this morning. And even as we do normally, CT is going to welcome you, and you will help us, according to your interpretation, tell us what the proverb means. All right.
We are in the Republic of Sudan. Why we're in the Republic of Sudan is because we've been looking at areas on this continent that we refer to, geopolitical areas called the Coup Belt. These are countries whose existence seems to have been characterized predominantly by just the number of coups it has had. And to breathe life into what I'm saying, Sudan, since it gained independence from the Anglo-Egyptian dominance in 1958, has had 7 coups. So, yes. But when Omar al-Bashir was president, he himself enacted a coup.
Yes.
He sat in that position for 30 years. And there was some semblance of stability in the country. But thereafter, after he himself was ousted by members of the military, he himself was a military leader, it looks like Sudan has been back to factory settings. It's now turmoil after turmoil with immense suffering from the citizenry of the country. Now this is my phone doing a thing.
It's calling people?
Yes, I didn't ask it to call, so I don't know why it's doing it, but there it is. The proverb: empty stomachs have no roots.
Come again, I didn't get that one.
Empty stomachs have no roots.
Stomachs have no roots?
Empty stomachs have no roots.
Empty.
Yes.
Have no roots. I think it would be signifying that there is nothing inside there.
True. And if you were to give an example, can you think of an example that would perhaps put life into this particular proverb?
Because if you say an egg has something inside.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. So which one would not? Maybe a football?
You know, you are an engineer. No, without a shadow of a doubt. Yeah, people call themselves engineers, and one wonders, you are definitely an engineer. You have looked at the mechanism, the workings of this object, and you figured, what is it that I can look at? Thank you.
Well, I think we can go with that, actually.
We will.
And we will just go with just that.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, usually we would do like an outlook, an overview, and say, here we are getting into how the country actually is lit. But today I'm going to start off with a comment that comes with somebody from, our audiences. And the first question that Florence has asked this morning, that MD is saying that the country is lit, but we've not had power in Kikuyu for the last 8 days. And we've gone to the Kenya Power offices, but our calls have not been answered and nobody is talking to us. And Florence, it would appear, represents the views of quite a number of people. Before we go into expansion work, let's look at maintenance work to keeping the country lit. Engineer Siror, what could possibly be happening here?
Thank you so much, Andrew, and thank you so much for this opportunity to speak to Kenyans. My assurance, first of all, is that actually the country is lit. And when we talk about the fact that the country is lit, there are a number of factors that one has to consider. We have a very expansive network. So that, yes, it could be true that maybe one individual or the other one is affected. One has to factor in that how many others are not affected. So that, yes, if it's a resident here and the other place, not that we would really want to exclude anybody, but by virtue of the network being so expansive, because you'll agree with me that really if you look at where our connectivity was a few years ago, vis-a-vis where we are right now as a nation, indeed, at almost 80% penetration level, that is one of the highest in Africa. You would definitely expect that some pockets of the country may be experiencing such kind of challenges. Again, if you look at what are the causes of some of these challenges, part of it is really from the public themselves. We do have incidences where our infrastructure is vandalized. We do have incidences where possibly interfere with our infrastructure by encroaching or possibly by not even allowing our teams to clear the traces. I would possibly actually not, or rather inform the public that if you look at the number or the percentage of our outages that are caused by trees, just our trace, it is somewhere between 60 to 70%. So that is to say then that for every 70% of the experiences that the public have no power, it is just because there was a tree somewhere, which was not, possibly because they declined to allow us. And I do remember, I don't know if it was in the last show, Andu, where I mentioned that when we started the very ambitious program of clearing the traces, recognizing the impact that it had on our customers, there were those who really resisted that. And they had reasons. They would actually tell you how possibly it appears environmentally, it counters the whole issue of caring for the environment. But our answer then, and still remains, that when you go to some forest in this country, we are really planting a lot of trees.
Okay.
But when it comes to our trees, if you really want to enjoy reliable power, then you must allow us to clear these trees.
But
I did mention, yes, allow me to complete that. That I did mention then that there are those who really resisted, but ultimately they allowed us. When they allowed us, they would call back and in shock, they would be calling to say, it's raining heavily, and whereas every other time when it rained, I would be off supply. Interestingly, the power is on. And I would ask them, did you allow us to cut the trees? And they would say, reluctantly we did. And I would respond back and say, that is the reason.
Okay.
So it could be, and especially when we are talking right now, when we just had some scattered rains here and there, it could just be there are some still trees on some of these traces, and we'd beg them, allow us to clear them, and also do not interfere with our infrastructure, even as we pursue the essence of having reliable power for all our customers.
But why wouldn't somebody give that explanation if I were to call Kikuyu KPLC offices, for example, and say, we've not had power for 3, 4, 5 days? If it was based on some of the things that you talk about, why wouldn't they just give an answer as to it's 1, 2, 3 and we're working on it?
Thank you so much for that question. I think I've had a number of incidences where, and really, I think the main cause of this is there is a very high dependence of power in this country. I will tell you, for one, I received a call once where somebody was saying, for 4 days, we've not had power. But when I investigated, it was just about 8 hours. And I would agree with the person. I would really agree with the person.
It feels like 4 days.
Yes, it feels like 4 days. And likewise, when people, or rather when the members of the public would call, many other times, actually, their calls are received. In fact, if you are to look at our contact center, where the number of dropped calls is actually less than 5%, I would surprise you that some of the leading institutions in this country are actually coming to benchmark with KPLC to ask, what have you guys done on your contact center? Because the number of calls we are handling and the number that we are dropping are very few. The reason why I'm bringing this about is that I've had incidences, and there are so many of them, where people would call, or rather they would even forward to me WhatsApp messages, and they tell me, your team is not responsive, we've called them and they are not responding. When I follow, I actually find they were given the answers. But because, again, they are so dependent on power, they would not accept that it will take a day or they need to replace a transformer. They would just write back and say they are not responsive, while really they were given an answer. It's only that they were not happy with that answer, and they were hoping that possibly by escalating to the CEO, a different answer could come out. So the whole issue could really be that they got answers, and we do have our call center, our contact center. Our contact center, like I said, there's only a drop of about 5%. And when we talk about 5%, is that out of 100 calls, possibly 5 are dropped, but the same 5 can call back and they would actually be among those which will be received. So we have a very effective system in terms of responding. But if there are any specifics, but I do know really that the first call of point is the contact center. And the beauty of using the contact center or star 977 hash is that there is guarantee your call is going to be logged. And if at all there is no answer, nobody needs to tell me that something was not answered. We'd actually be able to use the system to know that this is what happened. Okay. So I would encourage the members of the public, let them use the contact center, let them use star 977 hash and report any call, and we will be able to track and even know how long it took from the time they reported to the time the issue was resolved. Okay. And we'll be engaging on an issue now which is really based on accurate data.
Now, Bonasio, as we talk about reliable power, I've just tried using the system right now, and it has just told me that technical difficulties, my request cannot go through. And that is while you are speaking here. So there's a difficulty with the system, star 977 hash that you talk about. But that notwithstanding as well, there is an issue of the response time in terms of Kenya Power. When I call with the request, what is the standard that the company has in terms of my issue being picked up and being responded to? Because at times, like the lady has said, I would call right now, I would be responded to after a day, after 2 days, after 4 days. What is the response time, and what will you do to fix the system, because it is not working from my end?
No, thank you so much, and that is a very pertinent question. Let me put it this way, that when you look at the raft of incidences or the calls that we do receive in our contact center, they would vary in terms of magnitude and what it requires for it to be resolved from one to the other. There are those that can actually be resolved possibly by even advising the customer on what they need to do. There are those that may require somebody to, or already there could be a maintenance activity. I think you still notice that possibly even if you look at the papers of today, there are parts of the country we are taking out because of our maintenance activities. A number of the customers are not even aware, or rather they do not read some of these newspapers or adverts, which would have informed them what could actually be happening in that area. So some of it could even be by virtue of the maintenance activities that are happening there, the line is going to be out for the whole day. So definitely if they call to report that, yes, I have this issue, there is already an answer that this is going to be resolved at the end of the day by virtue of the fact that there is a maintenance activity which is going to take a day or the other one. There are those which could actually be because of overload conditions. Let me put it this way, and really informing the public that the power demand in this country is increasing. Indeed, if you look at the peak demand over the last 1 or so months, the peaks, actually about 2 months, the peaks have been hit almost 7 times. This is unprecedented. So that is to say the amount of power Kenyans are consuming is increasing. And when that happens, then what does that mean? That some of the transformers may be getting overloaded. Okay. And if they are getting overloaded, that is not now something that can be resolved today or tomorrow. Indeed, one of the things that what would happen is one may have to stay with that condition even as a long-term solution is actually found out. So it all depends really on the kind of challenges that are there. And I think I did mention this in the past, that for some time, especially coming towards 2023, Kenya Power had failed to undertake a number of maintenance activities. And this was not because of its own making. I did mention the issue of litigation. They would tender possibly to procure certain items that are necessary for undertaking the maintenance. And the tender wars would arise where people would take one another to court. The Kenya KPLC is blocked from progressing them. And so there was a backlog in terms of what needed to be maintained. There was a backlog on all fronts. People were paid, they were not being connected, transformers that had been paid for. So it was almost a chaotic situation. So when we now came, and when I did come on board, and again, God really helping me, we were able to unshackle and really make progress on all fronts. But by virtue of the backlog that I then obtained, the issue was not going to be resolved overnight by virtue of the fact that it takes even to undertake these installations or even to complete the procurement process. But if you are to compare maybe 2 years and now, and that is really one of the key things we could mention, in terms of the progress we have made, we had made a lot of progress. But I am not saying that we have resolved everything. I want to admit that we are still closing in on some of the small gaps that are there. So it's just a question of time before we catch up on all fronts and the quality of supply in this country is going to be a level which has never been experienced before.
You know, it's interesting. I have dialed that *977#, and I've actually managed to get through.
Exactly.
So sometimes it's just...
That could be one of the five. Yeah, I talked about 5%.
Yes.
I didn't say 100%.
Yes, and everything that I have required have actually been responded to, even as you are talking.
Okay.
I think systems have glitches. It is the nature of systems.
Absolutely.
And when they have glitches, sometimes I think, as you say correctly, the dependency is what now makes people ill at ease. And ill at ease because you're used to having power. So the time it isn't there, that's the anomaly. If you're used to not having power.
True.
The anomaly is when the lights come on.
Yeah.
That is true.
Something that happened at the end of 2024, which was, I considered very interesting, was the profits that Kenya Power posted. Now, I'm interested not in the profits. I'm interested in knowing, when you talk about costs being reduced and efficiencies being put in place, walk us through this, because Kenya Power for the longest time was known as a loss-making entity. So when it now starts looking up and we are being told half-year profit, you're talking about 9.97. At the end of the year, you're being told something like 30.08 billion. And you're talking billions of shillings. This is big. What exactly was done to get this turnaround? Because in my mind, it's a turnaround.
It is indeed a turnaround, and thank you so much for asking this question. There are a number of initiatives which we did as a company. Number one, like I mentioned, was that we increased the number of those who we were connecting. I think in the past, because of the challenge that had then been experienced, it was not possible to connect new customers. So we connected a number of new customers, possibly to the tune of almost 400,000. On the other side, again, we revamped and worked on refurbishing the network. Again, that is a factor that had not been done for long. So when you combine all those efforts for revamping the network, that means now people were able to enjoy that power supply for longer periods. We had more customers coming on board. And another factor also that really did come in our aid was the stability of the Kenya shilling. When you talk about the generators who generate power to us, and I think it is important, I think many other times, Muga, where citizens forget that we buy this power. They really think that Kenya Power owns it. No, all the power that we sell, none of it do we generate as a company. We buy it from IPPs, we buy it from Kengen. And when you look at the currency for buying this power, it's mainly foreign. So that is to say then, and when you look at our obligation in terms of what we need to pay for the loans and what we need to pay for this power, it's an average of $1 billion. That is if you put it on dollar terms.
Per year?
So, yes. No, per month. No. Anyway, of course, in terms of the obligations at any point, it's about 1 billion. So, of course, we are paying. We are paying this. No, it's 1 billion at every point because we are paying. But what is now, put it this way.
Okay.
We are buying this power.
Yes.
So the power that we buy and the obligations that we pay stands at almost $1 billion.
And is it made back by Kenyans then who are purchasing this power at the meter?
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. You know, as time goes, they have generated more. So there is the gap that is filled by the fact that we've bought power now for this month. So there is the dollar obligation that arises from the same. And then on this other side, it's like a flowing pipe. You have the ones that you are now getting in, and there is the ones that you are paying out. So at any point, the obligations stand at almost $1 billion.
Okay.
So that now, if you look at it this way, when the dollar, maybe let me go to the year before Muga. If you looked at what the exchange rate when it closed the year June 2023, the dollar was about 140 shillings or 142 shillings.
Yes.
That is 142 shillings, Kenya shillings to the dollar. The year before, it was 118. So that is to say then, if you are just looking at our obligations on dollar terms, we owed 118 billion Kenya shillings at the beginning of the financial year. And we ended up owing 140 billion at the end of the next financial year. And that is if you are assuming even there is no payment. So that would make it appear then that your obligations have increased by 22 billion. But that 22 billion is just by virtue of the fact that the Kenya shilling has depreciated.
Yes.
And so that when you look even at our returns our performance for the year that is coming to June 2023, the finance cost, that is the impact that we got from by virtue of that variation. And again, the fact there was one other aspect which we are yet to solve, but we are also believing that this is one of the hiccups that really needed to be solved for Kenya Power, is whenever again we would buy the dollars in the market to pay for these obligations, we would buy at market rate. But when it comes to regulators, sorry, I think this one was not... when it comes to the regulator allowing us to recover, we would be recovering at CBK mean rate. So that then, if you looked at the impact alone on the coming to 2023, it was 4.7 billion. So we lost 4.7 billion by virtue of the fact that we are buying dollars at one rate and are being allowed to compensate at the other one. Now, so the entire finance cost, or what that aspect of finance alone affected us, was to the tune of 24 billion. So that for that financial year, Muga, we had met operating profit of 19 billion. But the finance cost, that is the impact of this foreign currency, was 24 billion. So it wiped off all the profits that we had made and pushed us to negative 4 billion. Now, when we now come to the year 2024, the reverse happened to an extent, because we started with around 140 billion and we ended the year with around 129. So instead now of it going to the negative, it almost assisted us. But it only assisted us to the tune of 7 billion. So when you look at our gross profit, which was for the 3.6 billion, or rather 41.4 billion, and you less, out of that, 7 billion was contributed by forex. So that is to say then that our profit, even if you just remove the finance cost, was still to the tune of that 5 billion. Okay. And this is now the one that was contributed by those other factors which I have mentioned before.
So, like I said, last time you were here, we talked about moving power to different parts of the country. One of the issues that you brought up was the fact that, you have to put up multiple kilometers, essentially, of lines. And that proved to be two things: an expensive affair and a laborious affair, which impacted on the power that then you're able to provide in different parts of the country. And that you're looking into ways in which to either shorten the amount of lines that you have to put up. And so the question is, where are we with that? And I think Muhoroni came in.
Tamu.
That area came in as a point of worry. And so, one of the residents at some point in the year is concerned about that.
They're referring to me.
No, I think that's a very good conversation, and it's really good to put us to task always where we note some parts of the country which have constraints. It's really upon us to ensure that we address it in whichever way we can for the citizens to enjoy this electricity supply. Yes, we do have still a challenge in Western Kenya. We call it Western Kenya, the whole region. But there are a number of interventions which I did mention at the time, and some of which are complete and some of them are in various stages. If I may just remind, I think the biggest challenge that we have in that part of the country is that we traverse a very long distance to reach them. And whenever you have a very long line serving a particular place, there are a number of constraints. To the extent that at times you might have enough power, but the challenge is the pipe is inadequate to carry all the power that the citizens require. And that has been the biggest constraint. The biggest constraint has been a line from a place called Mamboleo to Moroni, and then Moroni to a place called Chemosit. And the challenge has been that the amount of power required by the residents, because that is the line that is dependent by places like Bomet, going all the way to Nyamira, Kisii, Migori, Homa Bay, and all those areas. And they are really depending on that line, which is quite constrained. And at the time, I did mention that the solution to that, first of all, in reducing even the losses, is a shorter path, because the power from Olkaria now had been, up to that time, moving all the way, bypassing Lesos and going to a place called Kibos. And that's a distance of almost 300 kilometers. And then, of course, it could go 7 kilometers to a place called Mamboleo, come another 40, 50 to Moroni, another almost 50, 60 to Chemosit, before now it goes to Sotik, then it goes to Gekati, it goes to Awendo, then it's Ndiwa, and then it applies those areas. So what we then did, because that is a length of almost 400 or so kilometers, there's a line which is to be done by Ketraco between Narok and Bomet. But we noticed that line was going to take long. And seated at Kenya Power, I was not ready to see those people suffering for a project that might take some little time to do. So we did implement what I would call a mitigating measure by doing a 33 kV line, which is at a lower voltage, from Narok to Bomet. And in so doing then, power can move from, that is from Olkaria, it goes to Narok, and then it goes to Bomet via that line. And then from Bomet, of course, it now connects to Sotik and the other places. But the main or the most important thing was to reduce the loading on that line. That is to say then that the inhabitants of Bomet can actually be supplied now from Olkaria directly via the Narok path instead of depending on the same Mamboleo, Moroni, Chemosit. And by deloading, we call it deloading. By reducing the load on that line, that means then what has been reduced is then available downstream for the other customers. And that line was already completed, and the customers are already enjoying better quality of supply. But by virtue of the fact that it's a 33 kV line, it was only able to carry maybe about 7 or so megawatts, which is quite substantial, because if you talk about the number of homes that then benefited by virtue of that intervention, that is quite positive. The other thing that we did, Andu, is that we also shortened the path from, because like I mentioned, the line was coming all the way from Olkaria, and then it would bypass Lesos and go all the way to Kibos. Now, what we did do, we terminated one of the circuits. The line that leaves Olkaria that was built by Ketraco is a double circuit line. That means it can carry in 2 parts at the same time.
Okay.
So we terminated one of the circuits in Lesos, because between Lesos and Moroni, there is another direct link. But before, it was being bypassed. So we terminated that line as Kenya Power, and that means then some of the time the power can actually flow directly from Olkaria, go to Lesos. Instead of going to Kibos, Mamboleo, back to Moroni, once it reaches Lesos, it can go directly to Moroni. And another intervention which also the ministry did really intervene was the revival of the Moroni gas turbine. We revived the gas turbine in Moroni to give a little bit of relief. But many other times it is not being used. And the reason was, when we did have this intervention, where one of the circuits we terminated in Lesos, it is possible to push power now. So the constraint that was between Moroni and Mamboleo is obviated by virtue of the fact that we now have this direct link. So those are some of the interventions, but there is another one also which we completed the other day, where we had a line from a place called Makutano going to a place called Chepseon. And the reason, again, why that contributes to the same is part of the load now from Kericho is being fed from Makutano. And that Makutano, by feeding it again from Makutano, you've reduced the load, or rather that would have been demanded from the line that goes to Chemosit. Okay. So anything that deloads Ahero, that deloads Chemosit, is actually going to address that. But there is one other intervention, again, which as Kenya Power we are doing, where we are connecting a line between a place called Miwani and Ahero. And the reason why we are again doing that is so that Ahero can be supplied from Kibos. Because as it were, the power was moving from Kibos, it goes to Mamboleo, and then comes to Moroni. So in so doing, it was overloading that one line. But if we can deload and supply some of the places from Kibos, then we can reduce the amount of loading of that line. So there are a number of interventions which we have done since the last time we talked. I think you must be a bit impressed that we have actually managed to do all that within this time. But yes, we have not resolved it in totality, but we have made a lot of progress.
Yes. You know what I've always wondered? Because as you're talking, every place you mentioned, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm actually seeing it. Why on earth did we have that circuitous route? The power is coming from the source, it is here. It goes across to a place which, but it bypasses all these places, go to some place, then goes back to a place which is near the source, and then comes back. What was the logic behind all this then?
That's a very good question, Muga. And the main issue in a number of these things that possibly from the circuit aspect we are talking about is that we have what is called a master plan, or the least cost power development plan. In this least cost power development plan, it provides for a number of projects to be undertaken and at what point in time. So what did happen then? If you look at the Narok-Bomet line, which would have dealt with that very quickly, that was a line that was planned for way back in 2017. So according to the least cost power development plan, that is a line that would have been constructed before 2017. But by virtue of some of these challenges of financing, a contractor comes, the other one happens this way, then it takes long. And now when it takes long, the constraints start to be experienced. Because that one was already known. It was known that by the year 2018, 2019, we would have this challenge. And what was the mitigation? A line needed to be done between Narok to Bomet, and that needed to be done by 2017. But now we are talking about 2025, and that line is not complete. So those are the issues. There are a number of projects in this country which were planned to have been completed as per the Least Cost Power Development Plan, but by virtue of certain challenges, it didn't happen. And by virtue of it now not happening, then we have those issues.
Now, engineer, there are questions that are being asked, and we'll just start with someone has just asked from Marsabit. Why is it in 2025 they're still being supplied power using generators if you're talking about the sustainability efforts being put in place by Kenya Power? And that note aside, the biggest question in the room, Kenya Power buys power from Kengen and other players. Why are you transacting in dollars? If these people are based in the country, or even if you're doing business with Uganda or Ethiopia, why operate in dollars? Why not agree on exchange rate using Kenya shillings or Kenya shillings vis-a-vis Ugandan shillings? Why the dollar?
That is a very good question. Let me start with that last one before I go to the next one. Why do we buy this power in dollars? Indeed, this is a very good conversation we can engage Kenyans on. And the reason why I'm saying we need to engage Kenyans on, if Kenyans were willing to fund these infrastructure projects, if the pension funds, the NSSFs, and all these who have resources within the country, if they would really be willing to invest in doing the infrastructure for Kenya, then that conversation would be totally different. By virtue of the fact that their resources are in Kenya shillings. So we can have such a commitment and they can actually do the financing. The unfortunate thing is the fact that the financing for most of these projects is foreign. And by virtue of it being foreign, the payment mode and the amounts are all in foreign currency. Some are in dollars, some are in euros, and I think those are the two most common. Some could even be in Japanese yen, by virtue of who has financed it. And to make what is called financial closure, including for Kengen, once you get funding, say, from World Bank, or you get funding from the French AFD, or EIB, or EU, all of it is in foreign currency. So the financing agreement, which is then signed, is to be making payments at certain rates, which is in foreign currency terms. So for as long as the financing of these projects is in foreign currency, then the payments have to be in foreign currency. None of them will be willing to take the risk of the fluctuation that might result because of the Kenya shilling. So, and that explains why, up to now, most of them, including for Kengen, a number of them, actually most of it is in foreign currency. And the reason why it's in foreign currency is because of those debt obligations. But I think if we can rally Kenyans, and maybe the way even others rallied their citizens, to rise up and fund some of these infrastructure projects, even if it means making contributions, then of course we can have it in Kenya shilling and it will really be good. Now, coming to the issue of Marsabit, that is a very pertinent question. And the main issue, first of all, I think, let me also just give an explanation. If you look at the energy sector, we have a number of players. We have those who generate. And when you talk about the generation space, you are talking about Kengen, you are talking about the IPPs. You are talking about even REREC to an extent. They have a solar plant in Garissa. And of course, maybe again linked to the same generation is GDC. And GDC is mainly for drilling to de-risk the issue of having to spend millions of dollars and then you find there is no steam. So that is at the generation space. After you've generated the power, then you come to transmission. When you now come to transmission, that is the place where Ketraco plays predominantly, but we do have assets as Kenya Power. But these are the old assets. But the one who is really moving and installing new transmission lines is Ketraco.
Okay.
So the biggest challenge that we have, even that you've raised, is to do with lack of transmission lines. But when you again talk about the transmission lines, what is the biggest challenge? They are quite expensive. So that means you require funding. And that explains why the government has actually been considering the issue of PPPs in terms of getting the private sector play into that particular space so that we can then fast track the installation of the transmission lines that would answer that question about Marsabit being, still at this point in time, being supplied by diesel generators. But I think we do have projects. There is one that we actually launched recently called the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project, which is more of hybrid that mixes a bit of solar, and where you have a generator, then it's not there most of the time. You would actually be running on solar, and of course it has battery storage, so it can support it even to a portion of the evening. But now when it runs out, then the generators can come in.
Okay.
So we do have interventions that actually address the same.
Rural electrification and last mile connectivity, big issues. We had a conversation about this just a couple of days ago. Where or what is the role of Kenya Power when it comes to those two? Last mile connectivity, essentially to the very doorstep of everybody, and rural electrification, making sure that everybody then has access to this. There are complaints across board of people having made payments, waiting for a transformer, waiting for poles, waiting for things like that. What's the role of Kenya Power in all of this to ensure that what we are having is really that everybody who can pay for it, who's done it, can actually have access to it?
No, I think the main issue, Andu, is that, first of all, when it comes to last mile under rural electrification project, none pays for anything. It's actually funded. It's either funded by GOK or it's funded by the donors, or rather not really donors, financial partners. So all these are funded.
Okay.
There's none who needs to pay for anything.
Apart from the 7,000 shillings that REREC told us that needs to be...
What does happen then is there is a loan which is extended to the beneficiaries of 15 million. It's a subsidized cost.
Okay.
So these 15,000 shillings is then paid when they are paying the tokens. Whenever they pay a token, say for 100 shillings, 50 shillings goes to pay for the token and 50 shillings goes towards paying the loan. So that is actually the structure of the last mile schemes. In terms of ownership, the owners of last mile schemes is actually REREC. But it does happen that the financial partners, by virtue of them wanting it to be undertaken within a short period of time and possibly harnessing on the network and capacity of Kenya Power, they would want, of course, the Ministry of Energy being the owners, they would want to implement, or the implementing agency to be Kenya Power by virtue of its capacity to implement these projects. So we do still find financial partners, or rather preferring to do quite a number of scope, harnessing on Kenya Power scope.
Okay.
And this would be understandable by virtue of the fact that we are across the country, we have the infrastructure, we have the machinery, and we have the systems that can actually roll out within a very quick time.
How long should it take? How long should it take, really, practically? Because again, because I can't find another place to give an example about. So I am in Muhoroni. And I'm trying to connect.
we will transfer you there. Or transport you there.
And I'm trying to have power connected to my house, and I go to the local REREC office, which I'm supposed to do, and I apply for that. They tell me it's an immediate thing. But the infrastructure, because their job is to bring power, the line is supposed to drop at my wall, right? But in order to have that line connected, I need a meter. Right? The meter is Kenya Power, right? So in terms of timing, because coming from the comments here and coming from the reality that we see, how long should it take? Because then people should be able to plan. If I've made whatever I need to do, I've done. What's the lead time between my application and the lights going on in my house?
Okay, let me separate the two. If it's coming under normal application, that is, you've applied for a connection, this is now a commercial application,
Okay.
then of course the issue would be how ready is your building to be connected. Because many other times you would find people applying, our teams would go, there is no wiring certificate, a number of things are missing, and they would be told, oh, certain things are substandard. So we'll immediately revert back and say, we've inspected your facility, possibly we don't have a wiring certificate for us to be able to connect. Because I've dealt with a number of those issues where somebody says it has taken very long. But when I follow, I actually notice the customer himself is not ready and maybe just wants the connection to be done without some of the basic requirements. And as a company, we can never do anything that would pose any element of risk.
Okay.
We are very stringent on standards. So, but once all the things are required, it should not take it actually should take less than 3 weeks for us to be able to connect you.
So all things being constant, everything in place, and me having done what I'm supposed to do, I should have the lights on in 21 days.
Depending again on how far the next our line is. Because what I mean to say is that it could be like you are 2 kilometers from where our next line is. So that means we still have to install a number of poles, we have to extend this and the other one. But I'm just talking about where we just need a drop cable. That is, there is a line that is passing next to you, and you are within a transformer radius. So it's just a drop cable to your house and metering. That one should not take more than 3 weeks.
Okay.
But let me come to the one that you mentioned, because I think I needed to separate the two. When it comes to those that come under REREC, that is the last mile schemes.
Yeah.
These last mile schemes must be funded. And once they are funded, I'm assuming that you are saying a last mile scheme has been undertaken either by REREC or mostly, I think the ones that we do ourselves will meet immediately. But the ones which have been done by contractors, and REREC normally uses contractors. KPLC, we can use our own teams, and we can at times use contractors. Once it has been undertaken by REREC, the process normally is they would apply for us to come and do the inspection.
Okay.
We may inspect the installation and find a lot of gaps that would actually force, or rather that would pose a risk if we just connected them the way they are. So what we'd then do, we'd actually identify them as snags. And we tell them we need these snags for them to be addressed so that we can now take over and meter.
Okay.
We do have a challenge at times in that the snags are not addressed quickly. And then you get the pressure to connect. So on one side, we want to really enforce the standards. We don't want to connect anything that does not conform to the standards of safety and the standards of installations.
Okay. All
right.
So that normally at times poses the challenge
problem.
in terms of how quickly. But if they are quickly done, if everything is okay, we should be able to meter within a month.
A biting issue, sorry, Dennis, a biting issue for a lot of people right now this morning. Nairobi West, 500 shillings. And this is a practical example. 500 shillings will get you 24.1 units on a prepaid meter. In Syokimau, in certain parts, 500 shillings will get you 19.5 units on your token. Why do we have the discrepancy in that price?
I think I had almost answered it, but let me come back to that answer.
And this is across board.
Yes. If you are connected using last mile scheme, no, I think I need to deal with two things here. Let me talk about, suppose you are connected using a last mile scheme. Whenever you pay 500 shillings, half of it goes to pay for the loan.
Okay.
And half of it goes to pay for the token. But let me assume that for once, that is not the case. If that is not the case, what does happen, Andu, is that we have tariff classes. 0 to 30 units. If your average consumption for 3 months, it's computed every 3 months, is 0 to 30 units, that is called the lifeline tariff. You enjoy a lifeline tariff of about 12 shillings before you add the levies and the taxes. If your average consumption per month is 30 to 100 units, you get a tariff, another second lifeline of 16.5. But if your consumption is above 100 units on average per month, then you pay about 22 shillings, which works to about around 30 shillings. So irrespective, if my average consumption is above 100 units, whenever I pay 500 shillings, they use now my tariff. What is my tariff class? I'm in the class of almost 30 shillings.
So you pay more.
So I would be paying, like in my house, if I paid 100, if I paid 500, and because I use on average more than 100 shillings, that one should get me less than actually about 17 units.
So if I can say it's so, if you consume less,
Yes.
you get more units for 500 bob. If you consume more, you get less units for 500 shillings.
Put it this way. If my lifestyle is such that I'm consuming less than 30 units, that would really be telling you this is somebody who is on the lifeline.
Okay.
Because for anybody, that means that person is only using it for bulbs.
Okay.
He's using it for nothing else.
Let me throw in the Let me throw in the spanner.
Please do.
So here's a question. Where Nairobi, we live in apartment buildings where people move in, people move out. Last month, City was living in Tamu, this apartment building. He was using up to 500 units. Then I move into his apartments and I am the 100 person guy, how do you deal with that discrepancy? Because then I would be using City's rate and not mine.
You've really asked a very good mathematical question, and you've asked the right person.
Oh, there you go.
What does happen? We do the average over 3 months. So that is to say, for the first 3 months, you might be lucky, because you see, your average may enjoy the tariff that the other person was using. But the moment the 3 months hits, we will have known that your tariff class is different, and you'll be moved to the next tariff class.
So you would see the difference.
Yeah. You'll actually start seeing it.
Okay. Engineer, in a minute, what are the plans, essentially? We say Kenya is lit. What are the plans over the next, if we're looking within this year, to make sure that, some of these bottlenecks that we speak of are actually smoothened out?
That is a very good question. And like I did mention at some part of the program today, we are still revamping we are still undertaking a lot of refurbishment for our network. That is why I'm almost guessing that even in today's newspaper or even our social media handles, we may be showing some areas of the country which are going to be out. And mostly, if you see 8 to 5, it's definitely an issue of maintenance.
Yeah, okay.
So we are undertaking a lot of maintenance activities. We are also expanding our medium voltage network. And so there's a lot of maintenance activities. And the maintenance, of course, goes to looking at the transformers, looking at the lines, clearing the traces, checking that everything is okay, checking overload conditions. So there's a lot that is actually going on in terms of refurbishing, in terms of introducing. If we notice there is a serious overload in a particular point, we look at ways to reduce the loads, and also the expansion of the grid. We are introducing some substations in some parts of the country and really expanding the network.
Maybe you can encourage your people who are at the other end of the phone when Kenyans call to just at least tell them what is happening, so that they can say, okay, fine, we will wait. If they don't get an answer, it becomes difficult for folks to know when the lights will come on.
I think the main issue is that they really harness our contact center, because we do know that some call individual officers or some of the staff of Kenya Power. That is not really the best way to track it.
Okay.
Let them log, let them harness our contact center, and I really want to appreciate the level of efficiency that we have from our contact center. I think the team are really doing an excellent job, and I really want to laud them even from this particular platform. So let them take advantage to log all their issues, and we'll be able to get back to them in terms of when the issue is going to be resolved. But possibly for some of them, we are already aware of the challenge and we are actually addressing it. Like this past week, I think we had an issue in Kibra where a line had collapsed. Yeah. And when the line collapsed, then what then happens is that we had to look for a short mitigating measure, first of all, as we were planning to restore the line, to feed them. And of course, the feeder, or rather the line that was being used in current, extended to supply them. And at times it was getting overloaded, and it would trip by virtue of that overload. But that was I really want to appreciate the people of Kibra, because when it now came to the time when we were actually undertaking the restoration, they really assisted our teams. There are places where our truck could not go, and they assisted our teams in terms